As you know, our tagline is recognizing our unity, celebrating our diversity, and we really mean that in so many different ways. Probably one of the most profound and obvious ways certainly would apply to religion, spirit, and faith and things like that. And so perhaps also you never met someone from a particular religion that's represented here tonight. Maybe you don't know anything about it, maybe you never studied it, maybe you have certain stereotypes about it. So that's really what Women's Mosaic does, is just sort of brings people together to really, so you can experience these things for yourself, you know, on a one-to-one, on a personal basis, not something that you read about, not a theory that you've heard, not a TV show or a movie that, you know, sometimes been portrayed that way. The point is also just to remember that, you know, the United States, even though with all our problems and everything, you know, the United States really was founded on this basis of religious freedom, or it's certainly one of the reasons, and I think it's just in the spirit of, it's just important to remember, you know, that that's the spirit of the Founding Fathers, was to allow people to worship and practice and discover God or their path in whatever way suits them. And, you know, I think a lot of times we take that for granted, so, because if you think about it, there's a lot of places where you can't. You know, you're told how to worship, or you're told, etc., you know, what to believe. So,
my name is Rubina Kaur. I'm representing Sikhism, and I grew up in Texas. My family took me to our house of worship, which is called a Gurdwara, every Sunday. So our religion was pretty much ingrained in our everyday lifestyle in Texas. And growing up, I realized that I'm taking it on my own. I'm not just being born into religion, but I'm actually accepting it and realizing this is where I want to be. Sikhism comes from, it's originally from India, and at that time there was so many issues when it first came about. For example, the caste system was very prevalent, considering women in a much less, giving women less respect and less appreciation was prevalent at that time. And when our religion came out, they were very emphatic about the fact that we don't believe in the caste system. Everyone is the same. Actually, one of our most famous gurdwaras, or houses of worship in Punjab, has 4 doors, which is to symbolize that anybody from any walk of life, any caste, any creed, any socioeconomic status is welcome. And that's how every gurdwara and every Sikh is supposed to feel in their hearts today, that there is no difference. You and I are human beings, and we're all sons and daughters of God. So as far as, you know, me personally, I feel like I'm an extremely opinionated person. I feel like I have very definitive views on several controversial issues or several hot topics in today's world. And I've never felt like Sikhism has hindered me. I've never felt like it said, okay, this is the way you should think, or this is the way you should act. I feel like it's let me choose for myself, but also forms a great structure for me to fall back on. So it's really brought a lot to my life, and I feel like it's a big part of my identity, as is my Punjabi culture from India. So.
You dance some bhangra for us?
He said, of course you should go to church, and not only should you go to church, you should go to a synagogue. And at that time, I really didn't even know any Jewish Americans. And he made the point that that religion was that God didn't want blind followers, that you should be grounded, but that you should really knowingly choose, you know, what you follow. And my mother used to always say that you worship God through respecting His creations. I mean, yes, Islam is our framework, right? But it's never a way to exclude others. And so that was my grounding for my religion. And I think the person that I've become is, I look at Islam as, for me, the 2 biggest attributes are justice and mercy. And for me as a lawyer, I honestly sometimes think, I don't know how I could have been anything else but a lawyer, being a Muslim, just because I feel so strongly about advocating for people who sometimes don't have a voice, or who are really, you know, don't have the same opportunities, or really need an effective voice. And yet, at the same time, I believe very strongly in mercy, and certainly God knows I need His mercy. And so for me, in terms of defining who it is, it's really interesting. Christina and I met 2003. And at that, I had just started my own practice. I've been a lawyer, believe it or not. I graduated 10 years ago from law school, and I did the law firm. I did, my first job was in-house at PET. I don't know how I ended up there. But anyway, I had a whole gamut of practices. But in February 2001, I started my own practice because I'd gotten married in January, and I'd always wanted to serve my community. And I didn't necessarily know what that meant, but be careful what you ask for, because I think God will give it to you. And so I opened up in Jackson Heights because I wanted to serve my community, and my community was Bangladeshi Muslims, and a lot of them were cab drivers and restaurant workers. And then, unfortunately, 9/11 happened, and by then I had already had a relationship with a lot of these community members. And so for me, how my religion has evolved is, luckily, I grew up in a household and in the view of Islam as being so loving and merciful and justice and equity, not just equality. I think a lot of times women, we focus on equality now, and I certainly believe in that, but we forget what equity is. And so when 9/11 happened, not only did I have luck, I feel very blessed to have had a relationship with my community, I also had a very great appreciation and love for interfaith work. And I had been involved with civil rights work when I was in college and law school. And so then, as a lawyer for the Muslim community, I was able to benefit from my friends in the civil rights community, in the interfaith community, and so my own religion was strengthened. And I think what it has done is really solidified who I feel like I was meant to be. I mean, I know that sounds weird, but, and I would just echo one last thing that Christina said in the beginning, is that oftentimes I'm in a lot of very mainstream, pre-establishment organizations or situations, and religion is really never thought about or even publicly addressed. If anything, it's a secret. Like, I remember when I used to pray, I worked at a very large law firm, as a lobbyist in DC, and I would tell my secretary I was going to lunch, and I'd get in the cab and put on the abaya, I had my skirt and suit, and then in the church, and then coming back after my Friday prayers, I'd be back in the cab, undressing, taking it off and going back to my office. And I think now, in some very establishment places, just recently at the American Law School Law Professors Conference, I spoke on a panel on professional responsibility and religious views on that, and I spoke as a Muslim perspective on that. And this is the first time they're starting to think about, what does it mean to be a Catholic lawyer? What does it mean to be a Jewish lawyer? What does it mean to be a Muslim lawyer? So it is, I think it's always been there, but it's slowly now, for whatever reasons, coming out in the public space.
Can you hear me? Okay. Well, I work for the Sikh Coalition, which is an organization dedicated to serving the needs of the Sikh community in New York. And I actually, well, let me start from the beginning. I'm a teacher by profession, and I came here to New York, didn't have a job, didn't have an apartment. I found a job teaching, I found a great apartment, and I hated it. I hated my job like crazy, and I didn't know why, because I had such an amazing experience in Texas. I didn't know why this was so difficult to transition over to New York, and I've never done this before. I'm a very calculated, planned person, and I just quit with nothing else in my hand. And my parents were like, "Move back to Texas. We want you back here. What are you doing in New York?" They had these outdated views of New York. Like, I'm getting mugged every second, and there's lurchers behind every corner and stuff. So I was like, no, I'm going to test it out. I'm going to see if I'm going to be okay here. And I happened to go to a religious conference in January, and there was a booth there for the Sikh Coalition, and I met someone who works there now, Amardeep, and I just happened to say, well, I have a lot of free time on my hands these days because I don't have a job, so if you need a volunteer, just let me know. I'll stop by the office and help you guys out. And I didn't know anything about the Sikh Coalition. I had no idea what they were about. And coming from Texas, where there's a very small Indian population, let alone Sikh population, I was like, this is really great that they're doing something like this for the community here, because they have so many to serve in New York. And he happened to call my roommate the next week and say, actually, we have a position if you want to ask Mambina to apply. So I applied for the position. I had no experience with nonprofits. I had no experience being what I am today, an operations manager, and I got the job. And I started working there, and I was amazed at the amount of work that they do. I was completely amazed. They do NYPD training to let the officers know exactly who Sikhs are. They do educational trainings in schools. There are right now 15 cases of either discrimination, workplace discrimination, or some other level of civil rights violations that we're fighting right now. And I had no idea. I had no idea that this is what Sikhs were going through in America. And so every day, because I'm constantly surrounded by my religion and people of my faith, we're constantly getting into discussions about my religion. And I feel really great because I feel like I can voice my opinion and at the same time be able to learn from other people that know so much more than me, and it's been a great experience. So I think I'm a little different in that sense because I'm working for a place that directly has to do with my own religion, but it's been very, very eye-opening. So I feel like I've progressed so much more than I would have being in Texas. So that's one thing. And the other thing, with regard to relationships, I told you guys before that Sikhism doesn't, discriminate based on your culture or your religion, caste or whatever. And I really felt that growing up. My parents never said, oh, don't make friends with that person, she's a Hindu. Don't make friends with that person, they're Christian, they don't know what they're talking about. She's never said that, ever. There was never kind of this barrier. I went to Catholic churches with my friends. I went to Hindu temples growing up to celebrate the different festivals and things. There was never any sort of stigma attached to that. And I feel like that's such a great thing because I've been able to meet and befriend and love so many other people in my life because of that. And because I feel that way, and it's so great to have my religion as that support that says, yeah, this is the way you're supposed to think. So